Hello, welcome. My name is Michael Graham. I'm one of the pastors of the Village Church in Hamilton, Ohio. And what I'm doing today is just responding to a question that we got via the Village Q&A, where you guys ask questions and we give answers. And these questions come from a Sunday sermon or a text that was preached during our Sunday gatherings. And you can find out more about those or about the Village Church at myvillagechurch.com. And just so you know, this question and response comes from the sermon that was preached on October 12th through our 1 Timothy series. And the text that we're dealing with is chapter 5. And so I just want to preface a little bit first before I read the question and attempt to give an answer. And so here's my preface. One, this is tough. It's a tough text. And mainly because it's very pragmatic, which means it's kind of practical and outworking rather than being built on like a theological emphasis. It's like this guy called Paul, he's writing a letter to this young preacher guy, Timothy, and he's telling him how to kind of manage the resources of the church. And so it's a little difficult. Thirdly, I would tell you this, that the sermons that we preach and even this Q&A is for our church. And certainly there's a global impact and all those things, but for us, my responsibility is not to pastor the whole entire world. It's to be a pastor to those that God has allowed me to by the spilling of His blood in Jesus and by the promise of His Spirit. And so what I get to do and what the other pastors of the Village Church in Hamilton, Ohio get to do is shepherd these people. And so it finds us where we are in our position and with the resources that we have in the context that we are. And this could look, because it is pragmatic, it could look different in a different context entirely. And so the text is chapter 5. And it's really dealing with, it talks a lot about widows and what's a true widow and how families are supposed to help take care of their own. And if somebody's not of a certain age, then they're not a true widow. And true widows are those who have devoted themselves to the Lord and are 60 years old and so on and so forth. And so it's really specific, which makes it tough. But what Paul's doing is setting out a precedent for how the church deals with the resources that they have. And so it can come off kind of cold, as I often come off, just a natural conversation anyway. And so this is what I want to tell you, and I've said this a dozen times since I preached this a couple weeks ago. And so here's the deal. This text and that sermon is a bumper that protects us from one ditch, but there's a wide spectrum all the way on the other side of this thing. And so there's lots of stuff in the way that God's people are to deal with God's resources that He gives and the way that we give those back. And so this one is protecting the church from being all things to all people, because we're not and we can't be. Only Jesus can do that. It doesn't neglect, however, the spectrum which ranges over here on the other side of things, which says that we're to love liberally and that we're to love and take care of the poor and the broken and all those things. And so it puts us in this comes down to managing resources and in honor. And I said in the sermon, it's not a matter of dignity, but it is a matter of this. And this was the crux of the sermon. The main idea was the church's resources are limited and must be stewarded intentionally, but God's resources are unlimited, and His grace and His mercy and all of the earth is His, and so His resources are unlimited, but on this life and on this earth, the church has limited resources, and so we have to be strategic in the way that we manage those. So here's the question. In the message, Michael spoke about individuals with burdens needing to do something with them, aside from bringing them to the church with expectations and hopes of the church embracing and responding to them. All right? I disagree that an individual is burdened solely so that individual responds and perhaps leads a new movement. All right, so there's no question there. And then it says this. My question would be, how does the church care for its own and be discerning about these burdens which are presented? What is the role of, and how can the church best respond? And when does the church consider that a response at a greater level than one individual must take place? So I totally get where the question's coming from, where the statement's coming from, and just first and foremost, I'm not saying, and I'm not sure exactly what I said, and if I said that, then I'm wrong. I'm not at all saying that the responsibility to lead a movement ever rests on one person's shoulders. And so if a person's burden, they come to me or someone else and they say, hey, I have this idea, I'm not going to say, well, that's fine, this is your responsibility solely, so figure it out. But as a church, we do have to have filters. And so I'm going to kind of speak to that and hopefully answer the greater objection or concern. So we do have to have filters. Any organization, anyone that's doing something intentionally and strategically, they have to be strategic, and there have to be filters that kind of guide what they're doing. And for us, first of all, those things can change over time. Like I said, in context, for us as a church grows, then those filters might shake out a little differently. Different people might be involved on different levels. But for us, as the Village Church, we have one staff person. We have about 180 people showing up on a Sunday gathering, and about 210 of those are under 10 years old. And so we have unique obstacles, and for us, this is how we think about things. Our vision and our purpose is channeled through this statement that we see every week. We are a community that's formed by the gospel and sent out on God's mission, right? And for us, it comes down to gospel, community, mission. And the way that we talk about that is it happens through relationships, right? The majority of what we do and the way that we see the church being effective is strategically gathering together to be equipped so that we can be sent out as the church. And so for us, we talk in terms of relationships. We have to have healthy relationships with God, knowing who we are in Him and through Jesus, that we're united with Him, empowered by the Spirit, and all those things. The gospel informs everything, and it forms how we live together with the other two relationships, and that's our relationships with the church, the way that we interact with others, that we're shaped by others, the way that we grow together, and the way that we interact with our not yet believing neighbors. And so it's God, church, and then those who do not yet believe. And so everything that we think about philosophically funnels through this gospel community mission, community, gospel-formed, sent on God's mission. So for us, philosophically, one of our filters, and we don't have this figured out. We're growing in this and figuring out as we go along, and so we come at this humbly and not dogmatically at all. But we err on the side of being grassroots. What's God doing? Let's look around, whether that's us as the church, corporately, and that would be the elders coming together and considering what God would have us engage in and not engage in, or whether it's us individually scattering out. It's more grassroots driven. What is God doing? What partnerships do we have? Where is God working? And what areas of our city, of our neighbors, of our neighborhoods is God active? And how are we a part of that? So let's put some energy and resource and work towards that, versus coming up with some top-down initiative or program or whatever that we throw a bunch of money and a bunch of people and a bunch of resource towards, only to have it fizzle out because God's not working there. And so it's tough, and these are kind of guidelines and grids that we try to think through, but we don't always get it right. But for us, we will always err on the side of grassroots relationships versus top-down programs. Always. Not to say that the church corporately and this office, so to speak, and the leaders of the church won't get behind things and put forth effort and energy. But at the same time, our resources, financial resources, time and energy resources, people, servant, volunteer resources, leader resources, all those things are limited. So if somebody does have something that's burden, that they have a huge burden for, then my first question would be, well, what's happening there now? Is this just an idea that somebody throws at me, or slips a note under my door and says, hey, the church needs to do this? Or is it something that God's working in? And since you are the one that's burdened by that, how is God working in this in you? Is there fruit developing? Is there an opportunity for us to impact and renewal through relationships, through resources, through restoration? And so I'm not saying at all that this is all on you. At the same time, I'm saying that how we view the church has a lot to do with this. And if the church is a building or an office or a person, then that's going to shape and that's going to shake out a lot differently than if we view the church as the body that comes together and scatters out. And so the emphasis is this: the church, nor any individual within the church, can be all things to all people. And so energy, resources, money, people, leaders, and all those things are limited, but God's resources are unlimited to do exactly what He desires to carry out. And so I submit this hoping to bring some clarity. At the same time, plead for grace as we humbly navigate what this looks like, and we engage in conversation, and we try to create opportunities to invite people into the church collectively and celebrate what God is doing through those opportunities. There's certainly a lot more to say, and if you specifically are the one with a question, don't hesitate to interact and to hit me up or to engage us in some other way. The last thing I would say it's not on you or any one person specifically, but what does it look like for you to bring this up in your community of friends or in your community group, to where you can say, man, is this something that God's stirring us to do? And we look at guys like Nehemiah, who were far off from his countrymen, and he had a burden. God burdened him to rebuild this city. And so he talked to the people that were around him, and he went out and he gathered people, and he proclaimed the vision with clarity and the purpose of what God was doing, and he got people on board. And so we are for that. I am for that. God is for that. I would just say, man, if it's a burden that you have specifically, look at the fruit, look at the effectiveness, look at the burden, and man, pitch it out to some friends or to a community group, and just figure out what that looks like, and join in God's work. And so I hope this was more clarifying than muddying the waters. And I hope you also tune in next time for another episode of the Village Church Q&A. Again, my name is Michael, and you can find out more information at myvillagechurch.com. Grace and peace be with you.